Merry Christmas Eve. No one is up yet here. Well, the 7-year-old's up. I'm going to read something I've just written recently. It's called P&W with T. To inquire into the phenomena of agency as experienced by the agent and perhaps give some formal names to concepts, we shall say there's a person P in a domain W with a way of thinking T. The actions of P in the domain W can be characterized many ways. Our conception of all interactions of P within W will of necessity be incomplete, missing identifications and important components, relationships, and laws of interaction unrevealed to us at the time of conception, or beyond the scope of visualization for a finite mind. We will even have difficulty saying if W consists of things or merely ideas, substance or energy, if there's a distinction between the two, and so on through a host of questions which are not bound to physical interpretations. However, the way of thinking T is characterized as a specific relationship between P and W and can be analyzed as it is subjectively experienced. The way of thinking T is an active complex and works on something, I, and produces something, O. Both I and O are taken as complex, and no assertion is made about their being a truly simple atomic element. That is, no assertion is made regarding I and O as sets to contain merely a single member, nor is it asserted it is not possible for them to contain a single member. If considering the input to P, we have a dilemma mentioned above, which is the dilemma of characterizing what I is. Is I substance, information, etc.? And also we've made an implicit assertion about P regarding it taking input rather than visualizing it as coexisting with other elements of W. Note that P belongs to W. Thus, such questions require us to characterize P's relationship with W in a way not physically verifiable. However, the way of thinking of P, T, is a characterization of the cognitive experience of P in W, including especially the subjectively located sense of performing T. Thus, the I and the O of T are possible to characterize as they are whatever elements are available to T, that is, the things which it is possible to think about. Any agent with subjective agency can therefore check characterizations of T themselves. It is the skeptical position, and the empiricists of all sorts generally, that the input to T, I, consists of perceptions, where perception is understood in the general sense. Specific classes of perceptions can be qualified, such as sense perceptions, perceptions of pain, of hunger, or even a perception that something is wrong, and so on. This general sense of perception is in fact abstracted from a notion of any sort of image in sense or feeling that is accessible to the mind. Use of a universal term perception for the whole set does not preclude distinctions, even sharp ones, between classes of subsets and I. Of primary concern at this stage of the description is the distinction between sense perceptions and other perceptions, and more broadly between reliable perceptions and unreliable perceptions. Whereas with respect to P in W, as any of a number of assumed paradigms, the output is behavior. In a first-person approach, via T, we inquire as to the nature of what T produces. What does one way of thinking about the perceptions one receive produce? Whatever it is, we call this O. And as I theorize about the set, we will remember that it is possible, when identifying components of O, to miss components. If we were to look into the abyss of considering the output of P again, and what it might be, we might characterize the output of P as its behavior. Its complete physical behavior, though, will not be a knowable set, and thus the type of the elements in the set will also not be known. But O is the product of T. T processes I and produces O. So what does a way of thinking, applied to some perceptual images about which it's possible to think, produce? The distinctions are more sharp in O than in the case of I. In some cases, it's clear that what T produces is also a perception, e.g., you witness shades of red, yellow, and blue, and T produces a more high-level or abstract perceptual concept of a beach ball. However, one might also merely memorize I, or even more starkly, processing I might produce action, invoke motor function. For example, I may perceive myself picnicking in the mountains, and then I perceive an avalanche, and T produces the result that I jump up and get out of the way. With respect to P and W, this motor function might be any number of things. However, all that T will have available to think about is whichever actions in O are perceptible. In other words, T will only be able to continue to think about O if O is perceptual in nature. So from the perspective of T, we can say that T produces perceptions T processes perceptions I and produces perceptions O, which then become I on a subsequent iteration of the way of thinking. Thus, P uses T to produce a perception of an object as opposed to raw information. It uses T to produce a perception of memorizing something, or it uses T to produce a perception of motor function, or any other possible perceptible behavior. So the question of did I cause or merely witness the motor function is avoided at this level. But T is still taken to process input perceptions and produce output perceptions. And this is really the foundation of how I think about things. To me, T is a philosophy. And you can see from this little schematic way that I've described them that T is pretty inclusive, right? It includes whatever the hardwired ways of reasoning are. It includes whatever the social ways of reasoning are. It includes whatever systematic biases there are in the way we receive perceptions. And it escapes some of the dilemmas of accepting this because it's not struggling to figure out how to make statements about something beyond perceptions, but rather just about perceptions. All philosophies, whether they consciously address it or not, um, at, at their fundament, have to answer this question of how to take perceptions. You know, what to treat them as, how to deal with them, how to think of them, whether or not to unify the things available to the mind as perceptions or not. You know, a Stoic approach to this. Now, it's funny because Stoicism's so old. You meet lots of Stoics, they don't think about this kind of philosophical question. In a way, the Stoic personality is not one given to lots of ruminations about philosophy that couldn't be proven, you know, of practical import. But of course, classically, the Stoics did think about this sort of thing, and they had an idea that you could apprehend reality, that through the senses, imperfect though they were, you could get enough information to ascertain what the objective reality is, and then you would have apprehended. The concept of understanding as apprehension is a Stoic idea. And the problem with this is then they believe that what they have available for their way of thinking is actual objects. Okay. And so that's an error. Now, lots of other philosophies don't consciously deal with how they take perceptions, and they tend to just make this biological assumption that they're dealing with real things rather than the perception of real things, or for that matter, just perceptions. So whether it's conscious or not, every philosophy still has to have some position on the process of perception and can be judged largely on that. Those philosophies that believe there's some sort of direct perception or can make sense of the idea that a mind could be thinking about a thing rather than thinking about its perception of that thing. This is a crucial distinction between philosophies with metaphysical errors, errors of being, errors of directness that don't take into account just how terribly indirect all of our knowledge of whatever the world is.